Welcome everyone this evening, and thank you for coming. I know it's a beautiful evening for a webinar, and thank you in particular to our three panelists who I'm really looking forward to hearing from. I'm Aideen and I am going to be chairing the webinar, so really looking forward to a great discussion. This is such a current and important topic. So what we're going to do is we'll run until about 7:15 or 19:15. We have three brilliant speakers, and they will each speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then there will be a panel discussion using we'll take all your questions post your questions in the Q&A, or you can also post them in the chat, and our speakers will answer them maybe as we're going along in the chat, or also we'll have a panel discussion after everyone has done their individual presentations. Feel free to comment in the chat, obviously, as we're going through the webinar. If there's any issues with audio or visuals at all, if at any point you can't hear me or the speakers, or can't see slides if they have slides, please comment in the chat as soon as they arise. So I am going to talk very briefly before we hand over to the experts, but what I want to just talk about is it's kind of the background as to who we are, Not Here Not Anywhere, and why we're running a webinar on hydrogen. So I'm a member of Not Here Not Anywhere. We're a campaign group, a fossil-free campaign group. We're a grassroots all-volunteer organisation, and we campaign for no new fossil fuel infrastructure or exploration in Ireland and anywhere. So not here, not anywhere. And we do a lot of campaigning on LNG terminals and other new fossil fuel infrastructure. And around that, we are also very interested in the energy transition, and this is where hydrogen comes in, and this webinar, because we are often asked, since we've been campaigning for the past 4 or 5 years, trying to stop new fossil fuel exploration and infrastructure, we always get asked, well, what do you do? If you're proposing to ban fossil fuels, what do you do if the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine? And hydrogen is sometimes put forward as kind of a solution to this. So hydrogen is an energy carrier, a bit like electricity, can be produced when you're generating energy from renewable energy or fossil fuels. So if it's produced from renewables, it's called green hydrogen. You can also have grey hydrogen from fossil fuels, or blue hydrogen from fossil fuels, but including some carbon capture and storage. So there's all these different colors of hydrogen I've heard, and obviously our panelists will tell us more about this. But you hear about the rainbow of hydrogen, pink hydrogen, yellow hydrogen, and all this, and it's all very technical and confusing for me anyway. So hydrogen can be used for energy storage and distribution. So hence it can support renewable energy when it needs support, when the wind doesn't blow, when the sun doesn't shine, or whatever that cliche is. One thing that is also that we've noticed or seen coming up a little bit more in our campaign against LNG terminals, so there are liquefied natural gas terminals planned for various parts of Ireland. We're hearing increasing arguments from the fossil fuel industry that we can build new fossil fuel infrastructure like LNG terminals, and it can be converted to hydrogen infrastructure in a few years. So this has been coming from the industry, the fossil fuel industry. But recently from other sources, including the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, CRU, in an Oireachtas committee meeting a few weeks ago, they suggested that an LNG terminal could be converted to be used as hydrogen infrastructure. So with all this, we thought it was a great time to have a webinar on hydrogen and find out more for ourselves, and also for everyone who's attending, and see what it's all about. So I want to introduce our three speakers. I'm really looking forward to hearing from them, and I'm going to stop soon and let them come in. So I'm really grateful to the three speakers we have this evening for coming and for giving us their time and their expertise as well that we're about to hear. So first we're going to hear from James. So James Carton is Assistant Professor in Sustainable Energy in Dublin City University here in Dublin. He's also founder of Hydrogen Ireland Association. And then we'll have Giuseppe Constanzo, who is Gas Policy Officer at Climate Action Network Europe, an NGO in Europe. And I believe, Giuseppe, you're coming from Brussels this evening. And then we'll finally have Lou O'Brien on, who is a member of Energy Cooperatives Ireland, and representative of the hydrogen production plans for Ireland's Valentia Island. So as I said, we're going to hear from each of our speakers individually, work away and put questions in the Q&A and also in the chat if you like. But the Q&A it's easier to collate them if they're in the Q&A from our perspective. And we'll hear from James first, then Giuseppe, then Louis, and then we will have a panel discussion which I'll come back in and facilitate. And with the speakers, I will, thank you, Bill, bringing the Q&A, that's great. And yeah, for the speakers, if you're going way over your sort of 15 minutes maximum, I might just give you a little prod at that point. But otherwise, yeah, work away, looking forward to hearing from you. And James, I will let you, I'll let you start off and present.
Thank you, Aideen. Just wave at me when I go over my 15 minutes. No, in fairness, I'm not going to talk too long. I'm not going to use any slides because I want actually to have this as the questions and answers are actually probably the most important part of this event. So my name is James Carton. I'm assistant professor, as Aideen said, in Dublin City University. My role there is I teach sustainability to undergraduate students and postgraduate students. And over the last 2 years within DCU, within the engineering department, we developed a sustainability programs undergraduate program, which is really getting lots of interest from our leaving cert students, which is great. And also we've developed master's levels degrees, graduate diplomas, graduate certificates in energy sustainability and energy systems, which again have really just multiplied in numbers over the last couple of years. And it really just sets the scene for actually the interest in decarbonisation, the interest in sustainability. So as well as I talk about, I'm co-founder of Hydrogen Ireland Association, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But what I want to do with the audience here is really just have them do a similar exercise that I get my students to do. And I want them to reflect into the future, actually, to pick a year, pick 2045 or pick 2050 or some year like that. And think of the world that you live in. And the world that, so I'm an optimist, and I'll go from my perspective. So the world I live in, if we've achieved what we need to achieve, is a world where there is no fossil fuels. There's no need for them, and beyond that, actually, there is no. We don't burn stuff. We don't burn many things, or pretty much most things we do not burn. And as I said to someone before, probably from a cigarette lighter to a power station, we probably don't burn much at all, except for exceptional circumstances. And if you kind of think of a future like that, you think of clean air, you think of health, you think of transport, but it's less transport, less vehicles, and every vehicle is zero tailpipe emission. And within its supply chain, it's actually low emission or zero emissions as well. When you think of the countryside, it's more diverse than it is now. Lots more green, lots more forests, lots more native, and that would assume that bioenergy possibly is either is a low addition to our future, or it's not a prevalent thing in our future system. And again, when you go to burn stuff and biofuels, you probably don't burn biofuels either. And then when you look at your home is probably comfortable, whatever that is for you, cold or warm. And most of our systems run on electricity. I think that's a kind of key thing. And I'm the hydrogen proponent here, but I'm saying electricity, which is actually from a thermodynamic point of view, from an efficiency point of view, we should electrify everything. So where do we get our energy from? Well, for Ireland, the modelling suggests that we need to expand our renewables a lot to actually ensure that our entire energy system is renewable. Now, people say we're going to hit 80% 80% renewables by 2030. That is just electricity, and that's just a very, very small portion of our energy system. by this future year that I reflect to, the entire energy system is renewable. So what does that mean? Well, it means effectively that your heating needs, which are mostly electricity, are all coming from renewable sources. Your transport needs, which are all probably about 70 to 80% electricity or battery, we'll say, are all coming from electrical sources. And any energy carriers in the system are all produced from electricity. And that would mean that we would probably have to have, you know, about 5 to 6 times more electricity production in our system in the state in the future. So we have about 5 gigawatts of installed production on our electricity system today, and a future system that requires all renewable would probably need about 30 gigawatts of electricity to sustain everything. And this is all feasible, by the way. It's nothing that we don't know, and nothing that we don't understand. And the interesting thing is that, well, it's kind of funny when you say it's 100% electricity system. Well, actually, of the electricity in our system in this future scenario that I present, our electricity would be more like 300 or 400% renewable, because all that electricity is going to be pumped into our electricity grid. But one would only suggest that we would only do a certain amount of advancement with our electricity grid, and we have to do something else then. And this is really where energy carriers come in. And energy carriers are something we use today. So we use energy carriers all over our system today, but unfortunately they're fossil fuel based. We bunker fuel, we store biofuels, we have all this line packing in the gas pipelines, etc. And it's all stored energy that's waiting to be converted into heat or electricity or a process. And the future probably is not going to be much different. It's probably going to have all this storage there. But the real question for the transition is actually what that energy carrier is going to be. And really, it doesn't actually matter what that energy carrier is. So we can burn a lot of electricity. But really the key thing is what energy carrier is suitable for which country. So if you look at, so let's look at kind of globally. So when you see countries that are fossil fuel dependent now, that have a lot of fossil fuel resources, they will have actually a very hard time of moving away from fossil fuels because it's ingrained in their society, it's ingrained in their education system, and they're the ones that are going to have probably come to the table late, and probably come with a lot of baggage, a lot of fossil fuel infrastructure, and a lot of potential around carbon capture and storage. Whereas countries like Ireland, who doesn't have any fossil fuel majors, they all left in the 90s and have only a couple of fossil fuel companies that are interested in exploring and using fossil fuels in the future. We're actually in a really good position where we actually can kind of say, well, actually we can transition. We can be like Iceland. We can be like the Nordic countries under hydro. We could be like South American companies under biofuels. We could be like Australia under exports. So again, we have the capability to do what suits us. And this is the interesting thing for hydrogen is whatever your system is going to be, it'll be designed for that country. So what works with Germany may not work for Ireland, and what works for the UK may not work for Ireland. So we have to build on our resources, on our capability, our population, and our society. Again, get a balance there to see what is our need for the future. So the future will ultimately be electrification, will ultimately require all the technology we have today. And we don't actually need new technology. This whole idea of we need this new technology, it's actually a bit of a farce, because whatever technology we have at the moment, or that's needed in the next 20, 30 years is there already. It just needs to mature a little bit more, and costs need to reduce. And for Ireland, what can we do? Well, our energy carrier needed for backing up our renewables, needed for heavy industry, and also an opportunity to export can be hydrogen. And we all know that the process of excess renewables, dedicated renewables, that you do not want power cables crossing the country. You do not want power cables not here, not anywhere. And so what's your option? Well, your option could be tankering it by ship, tankering it by truck, or tankering by or transporting it by pipe. So again, it's kind of similar to what we do today. But again, we don't have to transport hydrogen. We could produce hydrogen by electrolysis. It's a really efficient way of getting energy and bringing it to a molecule that you can store. But then you can actually convert that to other carriers, such as ammonia, which is a good one. Now, ammonia is interesting because actually, technically, you can burn it in a turbine or something to produce really large amounts of electricity for weeks or months on end. You can do the same with hydrogen if you really want to. It's up to the system and what we choose. Ammonia becomes something interesting though, that you can actually bunker it and quite easily tanker it around the place and stuff. Whereas hydrogen, probably pipelines will be useful. So again, and the thing about Ireland is that we do not have a need or requirement or experience to go down grey hydrogen, because we've never did it. Any hydrogen we use today in our system, which we do use about 150 tons, is all produced by an electrolysis actually in Ireland, or it's imported. So we don't actually produce any green or grey hydrogen in Ireland, which is the fossil fuel stuff. But we could go down a blue hydrogen, which is the technical definition for actually using natural gas, cracking it to hydrogen and carbon dioxide, and then capturing that carbon dioxide and putting it underground. And fingers crossed that it doesn't come out of the ground. But I think with all the madness happening on the war in Ukraine and the issues that's happening with energy security on natural gas, certainly from Russia, I think natural gas is not going to become a part of our energy security's future. And because of that, ultimately, blue hydrogen probably has come to its end of its potential opportunity. And I think the only thing for Ireland, and this is coming from the government departments, is green hydrogen is the solution for an energy carrier. And then where that brings us along the system, it will be converted into electricity, or it can be converted into feedstocks or whatever you want. From a societal point of view, society needs to come with this. So we teach the students this thing called energy transition. And I hope, again, I retire out of DCU, that this transition, I don't have to teach that module anymore, because we've gone through the transition, that we've actually gone to this cleaner world where we don't have to transition, we've transitioned. But it's our society needs to kind of come with us, understand the implications, the opportunity, the things that are going to be hard to do in the couple of years. We saw an issue this week actually on turf cutting and turf burning. As I see in the future, we probably won't even, we won't be using our chimneys on our houses. What do we do with all of them? So it's this transition, really, this period is really difficult for us individually and actually politically. But certainly the government does need to lead. People are good, they will do things, but certainly it has to come from the top to actually transition to renewables, to reduce the amount of energy, to reduce those car journeys, to reduce that energy dependence in your homes and in your businesses. But we do need that incentive to actually push that on. So what I'm going to end up here really is I can talk about LNG terminals and lack of capable of conversion within the questions. But what I'd say to policymakers and what I'd say to engineers and builders of
Oh, I think we're losing you there, James.
This infrastructure that we need is make.
Oh, sorry, we lost you for a minute there, James. Just when you said, I think what I would say to policymakers is, and then you froze. So maybe if you can repeat that, because that sounds important.
So what I'd say to policymakers is invest in our future. You know, invest in technology that we can use in 30, 40, 50 years time. Do not invest in technology that we're going to have to convert to something else in 10 years time. And we can build our, we can ensure that we have energy security in the short term and the long term. But it's better to build sustainable, and it's better to build once, because we know what the future is going to be. We know the future is not going to have any fossil fuels in it. And what I'd say is, so we've got a project called Highlight. It's supported by MARI and SFI funded. And that's trying to answer some of these deep questions, really looking at the problems in our energy system, looking at the task of decarbonization, and really understanding where that path brings us, and where hydrogen fits with it, where electrification fits with it, where onshore wind fits with it, where solar fits with it, and what is the potential for offshore wind, for example. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't know how many minutes that was, Aideen, but I'll hope to kind of answer any questions that you have, technical or otherwise, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, James. That was a brilliant overview of, I suppose, what's required, what the challenge is to the energy transition. You did great on time, so maybe if it's okay, I might ask you one question, which is, so there are a few questions coming in the Q&A. I think I might just ask you the one, there's loads to discuss later, particularly hydrogen and transport and big questions like that, but I just want to ask you Bill's question, because I think you touched on this briefly. So he's asking, I've read that producing green hydrogen on the scale promised by corporations and the EU would require far more wind turbines and solar panels than could ever feasibly be built. In other words, if we go along with the hydrogen plan, will we end up with hydrogen that is always mostly fossil fuel produced? So it'd be great if you had some thoughts on that one.
Well, so as I said, it'll be regionally specific, and it'll be country specific of how they decarbonize. So the unfortunate thing, just in general, is that carbon capture and storage technology, even though we all don't think it's working, don't really like it, but definitely need it if we are to bring us back down to 1.5 degree globally increased temperature by the end of the century. So that might end up being a probable push for any country that wants to use carbon capture storage, and therefore a fossil route to hydrogen. But for most countries in the world can go down the green hydrogen route. There will be and countries like Ireland, like we have a nearshore capability of about 70 gigawatts of offshore wind. Multiply that by maybe 10, and that's probably just a couple of kilometers off the west coast of Ireland. And we have another, 1,000 kilometers of Atlantic in the middle of the ocean. So I don't agree with this whole idea. I'm an engineer. I don't agree with the idea it's unfeasible. It's kind of like computers are never going to have the speed as we knew today. Einstein thought science was over in the 30s. So I don't believe that these ideas of would require too many solar panels and turbines. I think we will reduce our energy need in the future. Our energy system is going to be way more efficient, so we do not need as much energy. We'll be more frugal in the future. We won't have to heat our homes. So I think all that will balance into actually a system that's lower energy, less energy required, and then therefore sustainability is kind of a good way to go.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. There are great questions coming in the Q&A, but we will we'll come back to them maybe after Giuseppe has spoken, and then after Louis has spoken in the panel discussion. But yeah, I think now I'll hand over to Giuseppe. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Can you guys
perfect.
hear me? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so I'm Giuseppe. I am working at CAN Europe, Climate Action Network Europe, based in Brussels. We are an NGO that represents more or less over 170 European NGOs in 38 different European countries. And what we try to do is to promote climate, energy, and development ambitious policies at EU level. We try also to provide support to our members, which are based at national level. We try to provide them with support on how to also advance certain topics with their respective MEPs or at national level. Personally, myself, I work in the gas team with my colleague Esther, and we look predominantly at gas files, so but both from the energy and the climate sector. So we work at the gas package or the gas market reform, which is currently ongoing, which basically sets the rules of the EU gas market. And then we also work on the methane regulation to address methane emissions in the energy sectors, which were not part of any regulations or directive before. So where do we stand in terms? Obviously, hydrogen is part of the work that we do, being a gas, and where do we stand as an organization? Well, you hear some stuff which will inevitably reflect what you just heard from James. But predominantly two things to start with. We only believe we should have mostly exclusively renewable hydrogen, and we believe that this hydrogen should only be used in the hard to decarbonize sector. And I'll try to walk you through on the rationales of why we do push for this at EU level with legislators. For what concerns the renewable hydrogen, well, we think that producing hydrogen with fossil gas is problematic under different points of view. First of all, when it comes to methane leakages, I'm not sure how many of you have followed, but for example, a recent study has shown that in the Permian Basin, they recorded methane leakage over beyond 9%. And to put that into perspective, if you have methane leakage, which they go beyond 3% across the life cycle of fossil gas, then you're worse off from a climate perspective than burning coal. So that's one perspective. Of course, there are ways to bring down methane emissions, and of course there are ways, or there are production sites and transports of fossil gas that are already compliant with that, but they are not the norm, not anywhere near. And this is why also we see concentration of methane in the atmosphere, increasing time after time. And then the second point about carbon capture and storage that James was also pointing out before, I also agree with, and this is my personal view, not necessarily the organization that I work for, that we will need at some point CCS to work and other carbon removals mechanisms. I believe this is what also the latest, the third report of the IPCC just been released a few weeks ago says as well. If we are to keep good chances to achieve, to limit global warming to 1.5, but so far we don't see this being a widespread solution. And if the European Commission has treated blue hydrogen more like an interim solution, so meanwhile that's prices for renewable hydrogen go down, we can use blue hydrogen, but if CCS is not there, how is that going to work? So it leaves more questions than answers. And then last but not least, I mean, high gas prices that are, I mean, happening since the last quarter, the last quarter of 2021, have made basically blue hydrogen currently basically at the same price of green hydrogen. And this is not to say that it will stay like this forever, but it gives you an idea that, I mean, bust a myth of this cheap, abundant fossil gas. It may well go down at some time, but it shows you the volatility of the price, which is not good for business, obviously. But moving on to the question of where we would like to see hydrogen being used, like I mentioned before, we would only like it to be in a hard to decarbonize sectors. This includes aviation, but specifically long-haul aviation, perhaps will most certainly, I think, play a role in medium-haul aviation. But for example, we see already some efforts to have battery, so electric planes on regional routes and also on some short routes. And we see also airlines displaying some interest in this. For example, in the US, United Airlines has put an order for a regional plane, and EasyJet in Europe is also collaborating with a company to produce a short-haul plane. Same in shipping, perhaps not in the form of hydrogen, and similarly also in the aviation, it may be in the form of pure hydrogen, but probably would also be in the form of so-called sustainable aviation fuel. So there, hydrogen would play a role of a feedstock to produce sustainable aviation fuels. In shipping, to also produce ammonia, but even there we see that there are some efforts to electrify some segments of the shipping sectors. For example, maybe some smaller vessels or for shorter distance that may as well work. And then when it comes to road application, we really see very little role for hydrogen, perhaps a niche for very long and heavy duty transports. But when you take into account, for example, that long distance driving, the drivers, they need to, according to EU rules, take a rest every, I believe it's 4.5 hours, and the rest must be something like 40 minutes or something like that. And when you factor in also the speed limits on the road, then if you do some math, you can realize you can do some 400, 450 kilometers and then recharge your truck for 40, 45 minutes. Obviously, you need to have the infrastructure there, and you need to have fast charging infrastructure. And then you can continue to do the second shift and finally get to destination. So even batteries could play a role in heavy duty trucks. And then steel making and also fertilizers industry, where hydrogen is already being used as a feedstock, but most of it is produced from fossil-based hydrogen. So we would like to see that being decarbonized, and other chemicals, but as well as in the power sector. In the power sector, not as a as a base load. I don't like this term, but not as a base load, but predominantly to enable a power system that is built around renewables, variable renewables, so most notably wind and solar, and to provide hydrogen there will fit together with other flexibility option as one of the flexibility options that can provide backup, especially for seasonal variability. So if we jump to where we don't want to see hydrogen at all, it's in the heating sector. And James touched upon this, but it is, I want to put it in this other way. So if you essentially have 1 unit of renewable electricity, you can either use that and produce hydrogen, and you produce about 0.7 units of hydrogen, and then you can put that in a hydrogen boiler and you get 0.6 units of heating. Or you could put the same unit of electricity and put it into a heat pump, and because the heat pump doesn't burn anything to produce heat, but actually just extracts it from a medium that may be air, water, or the ground, they have quite high efficiencies, and they can reach even 300% efficiency, or I'm not sure what's the right term for that, but you get the gist. And of course, this doesn't mean that heat pumps work everywhere. You may, if you have, for example, a very poorly insulated building, it may not work there. Well, you'll need to retrofit your building, but this is something that is absolutely doable, and that in the long term also brings benefits to the people that live in there. There are ways around the challenges that will present. The other place where we would like not to see hydrogen is in certain industrial processes where low-grade heat, so low temperatures, are used for certain processes. Also, those can be fairly easily electrified. And another one is road transport, so for private cars and urban buses, and also different types of road transports. We don't think it makes any sense. We think batteries are way more efficient. Total cost of ownerships for users is could be much lower than having a hydrogen vehicle, and also the infrastructure needed, the refueling infrastructure needed, the hydrogen refueling infrastructure is much more expensive than having electricity recharging points for vehicles. So why we want to make sure also that these sectors don't get it, besides the economics that I was just hinting at. First of all, is because, like I hinted before, to produce hydrogen, you need to mobilize large amounts of renewable electricity if you want to produce renewable hydrogen. And as James was also mentioning before, we are basically going from an energy system, we want to go from an energy system that currently, where electricity only covers about 22% of final energy uses, to an energy system where electricity covers about half, just under half. So we need as much as possible of the renewable electricity to get to direct electrification first, because then you have also higher efficiencies like heat pumps or battery electric vehicles. And you want to minimize the energy conversion losses that then it would be incurred when you produce hydrogen through electrolysis. Another point where we don't, we're trying to push at EU level not to have hydrogen is in blending. And like I mentioned before, we do work in the file of the gas market reform, which sets the rules for the gas market. And the European Commission has proposed that at member states' borders, blending should be allowed. Neighboring states should accept, without questions asked, blended shares of up to 5% in volume. That doesn't mean that that every country must do that, but they must accept it if the neighboring country does it. And some countries already do. And this is very problematic because once you dilute it into the gas grid, it essentially goes to anybody that is connected to the gas grid. And the #1 customers of fossil gas today is buildings to produce heat. And like I mentioned before, there are much better ways to heat your place than to use fossil gas, let alone hydrogen. And also it doesn't really help that much if we do this for pursuing climate objective. It doesn't really help that much because if you blend 20% hydrogen into the gas grid, it only yields about 6-7% greenhouse gas emission reductions. And finally, I have a point on, let me check on time. I have 2 minutes. Yes, on converting LNG import terminals to liquid hydrogen or ammonia. It's been a question that has been also bugging me a lot for the last few weeks. But what my understanding is this: first of all, what do we mean by converting this? So if by converting we mean taking the LNG terminal and suddenly from one day to another, instead of pumping in LNG, pumping in hydrogen, then this is not going to work. What you need to do, as far as I understand, is because of different liquefaction temperature, you need to change the envelope of the storage. You need to change the insulation. You need to change some of the piping, some of the valves. And apparently to convert from LNG to liquid hydrogen storage, you're basically spending so much money that you could build another LNG. So can that be classified as, you can use it then for hydrogen storage? Well, if you build it brand new, basically not so much. For ammonia, it seems to be slightly different, slightly more easier. But for both questions, I would ask, if you build an LNG terminal and say that tomorrow you use it for liquid hydrogen or ammonia, then I think you should also take into consideration the location of it, because if then once you convert it nearby, you don't have customers that will use that ammonia or hydrogen, then you might incur into additional costs to also transport it to the final users. And that was all for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Giuseppe. That was fantastic to hear about the different sectors. It was really fascinating. I wanted to ask you, before we move on to Louis, I just wanted to ask you one quick question. It's kind of because jumping off what you were saying about transport, it's actually a couple of people are asking about transport in the Q&A. So Cormac has a question. There are serious concerns about the use of hydrogen in transport, with many studies saying it's not economically viable and a poor use of hydrogen. Should all organizations stop promoting this as a solution to environmentally friendly transport, and hydrogen's use be kept and prioritized for heavy industry and carbon intensive industry, shipping, etc. first? And there's a similar, Henri is also wondering, do you think hydrogen could be a realistic alternative to fossil fuel for mobility, or is it where ammonia could come into the picture due to it's easier to transport? So what sort of is hydrogen economically viable for transport, and what about the role of ammonia there as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think this is a question that needs to be breaking down, and everything has nuances, right? But as I was trying to explain before, I mean, for road transport, there's a very iconic graphic from Agora Energy Vende, which shows the development of battery electric vehicles and the development of fuel cells electric vehicles, and you'll see that basically there are no fuel cells electric vehicles that go with a hydrogen, whereas battery cars are literally exploding. And I mean, this is the market driving it, right? And also in terms of people total cost of ownership, I mean, they realize that this is I think a much better solution. So yes, I think when it comes to road mobility, especially the town halls and local authorities should really think about whether to convert their urban transport systems or their buses to hydrogen, or whether to have an electric fleet, for example. Not to say that electric vehicles don't have their challenges, but it seems to me that it's really the go-to solution. And when it comes to ammonia, my understanding is that this is something, I mean, perhaps James has something more to add on this, but for shipping, it is a viable alternative. Maersk a few weeks ago has announced something on this. But and similarly for aviation, I mean, there are possibilities to electrify aviation, but my understanding is only when it comes to regional flights or to short haul flights. But at present, it's not something viable for medium, well, present, even in 2030, I don't think it will be viable for long haul or medium haul flights. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for answering that. And we'll get back to talking about that in more detail when we get to the panel discussion part of the webinar. So I want to introduce, I'm really looking forward to this, to hearing from Lou about energy cooperatives and hydrogen on Valentia Island. So Lou, over to you. I'll let you go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Seeing as we're not doing presentations, I'm just going to read mine. So that's good. So basically, Energy Corps Ireland was established in 2011, so we're on the go for about 11 years. There was no energy cooperatives in Ireland when we started. There's now currently 6, with another 2 in the pipeline, as it were. Interestingly, nearly all of our energy co-ops are based on the West Coast, as I was saying to Aisling before I got on, that we spend most of our lives up and down the wild Atlantic Way, which is a very pleasant way to spend your working life. That is probably a legacy of the strength of community organisation in the West Coast, and the openness of people on the West Coast to outward lookingness, and also driven by the need to address some of the economic and social inequalities that have arisen between the East and the West Coasts. Through our work, we've been exploring a number of opportunities for people in the West Coast in the renewable sector, trying to meet some of the unusual challenges that they are faced with in the West Coast. So we've always been interested in the hydrogen sector, but as we have moved through providing solutions on the West Coast and researching opportunities, we've become aware of an increasingly significant role for hydrogen. So just to give an example, one of our co-ops is, when I say co-op, every co-op is independent, obviously, and we are just associated fraternally with them. But one of our colleague co-ops, shall we say, on the Iron Islands, is investigating the use of hydrogen in a Interreg European Union, European Commission funded project. So in keeping with what both James and Giuseppe said, There is a heat demand on the island. There is a transport demand on the island. There's a variety of energy demands on the island. But the largest, by far, single energy requirement on the island is the maritime transport. Okay, it basically accounts for 50% of all energy consumed on the island. That maritime use of effectively fuel oil, is not replaceable at the moment with electrification. There is therefore an opportunity for hydrogen in that maritime sector, not only for passenger and freight ferries, but also further. Also, does an aviation energy use on Inishmore and the rest of the islands, and that also, although it's short hop, it may or may not be open to electrification. But certainly there is research that is very promising with small twin engine planes in North America, which is showing that hydrogen is viable. And if you can beat the price of kerosene with hydrogen fuel, well, then I think that that's your target. And if you could do that, well, then it becomes a viable alternative. Similarly, one of our other projects that we are working on in Achill, we just completed it. James was very kind. He came down and also spoke to the community down in Achill, who I think, James, would have been, you'd agree, they were very enthusiastic about getting involved in the hydrogen production. But we did examine some of the opportunities that they had for hydrogen use as well. And perhaps, I don't want to be starting necessarily a debate on this, but we did do fairly detailed studies of the alternative to, let's say, the diesel bus service that they have down there, providing an alternative using either battery or fuel cell bus transport. The battery system, when you took into account the routes, the distances traveled, the time between the different routes, you would need to replace the diesel, the 2 diesel buses that were used with 4 electric buses. Whereas you would need to replace the 2 diesel buses with 2 fuel cell buses. So there actually is quite a strong economic argument to be made in that instance. It's frequency and of use, distances, and the requirement for recharging. And certainly, I agree, it may not be totally viable to use buses in an urban environment with fuel cell buses, but certainly in let's say distributed populations in the West Coast, it is much more realistic because you're cutting down on the cost of plant. Not only that, but we have been told by bus transport providers that it is going to be virtually impossible to electrify much of the rural fleet in buses, owing due to the lack of grid infrastructure and the locations of the various bus stations, shall we say. So that there are opportunities for medium to longer haul transport. And we've discovered this, so the people in Valencia are very keen on this as well. They see the opportunity of hydrogen use, which we'll just talk about right now, in their ferry service, their fishing fleet, and in some they do have a high heat industrial demand also. Not only that, but having access to renewable hydrogen that can be used in high heat applications in the West Coast will open up opportunities that don't exist at the moment for industrial processes that could be employers. So the people of the West Coast are very keen on finding as much as they possibly can out about the hydrogen sector and the opportunities for sustainability. Well, possibly one of the greatest things that they've recognized is that unlike fossil fuels, hydrogen can be produced near the West Coast. of Ireland. We're not as fortunate maybe as our Scottish cousins insofar as we did not have access to abundant sources of gas and oil economically. But we are more fortunate than they insofar as that we didn't help pollute the planet by dint of the fact that we didn't have access to the amount of natural gas that they have. So we have that opportunity on the West Coast to produce hydrogen. That is an opportunity that is going to potentially revolutionize Irish society and Irish economy, because it will possibly flip the Irish economic system from east to west the other direction, so that the energy source and the economic source will come from the West Coast and will then move eastwards. Now, what we've done in Valencia is that we have, in cooperation and partnership with the local energy cooperative down there, through exhausting public meetings and consultation exercises and listening exercises, we have created a coalition effectively that has applied for planning permission for a 1 gigawatt offshore electricity generation project. That we've been told quite bluntly by, and frankly, thankfully, we're grateful for this, by the grid operator, the grid management organisation in Ireland, and we've been told that they do not want to see so much nearly as an electron of that coming on onshore in Valencia. Kerry County Council have also begged us the same. Please, please do not bring your electrons on. Why? Well, because you'd have to reinforce the grid to such an extent, the West Coast, Southwest Kerry, to make it effectively, you would be disturbing the community, damaging the heritage and the tourism opportunity that exists currently. So we need to have another vector for the power, for the energy that we can potentially create. And thankfully, hydrogen is the key. Now, we estimate that we will be able to produce hydrogen at a very competitive rate of about €2 per kilo. What does that mean? Well, the same amount of energy, if you were to use, let's say, diesel, to have the same capacity as 1 kilo of hydrogen, it would effectively cost you maybe, what is it, about maybe €3.50. Okay, so we would be undercutting diesel, which would be nice, and that we obviously have to have a market for that. So we've been told, and we're part of ourselves and Valencia Energy Cooperative are part of a further European-based partnership with the German-Irish Hydrogen Forum, and there is going to be a demand in 2030 for. I'm going to have to consult my slide here.
That's perfect. Work away with slides if you like.
No, 3 million tons of hydrogen in 2030. Okay, that's the demand. Okay, that will exist. Now, our 3 gigawatts that we're going to produce on the west coast of Ireland, just ours now, not including everybody, all the other projects. These are the community-owned projects. Our 3 gigawatts will satisfy at maximum 7% of that demand if it was 100% channeled into hydrogen. So you can see that even in 2030, that the demand from one single hydrogen market, i.e. Germany, will be far in excess of the capacity that we can produce in Ireland. Now, if we were to meet that demand, just the German demand in 2030, and that's for industrial use, Giuseppe, you'll be glad to hear, not for heating homes in Frankfurt. It would be for making cars, some of them battery operated, hopefully. So if you are going to have that, if you're going to meet the demand of the 3 million tons from Germany, you'd need 42 gigawatts offshore in Ireland. Okay, and that's just Germany. 42 gigawatts. Now that is a lot of power, okay? But just to put that into perspective, and this is what I suppose what our vision is that Ireland isn't going to just decarbonise itself. Ireland has the opportunity to decarbonise Europe. Okay, if you were to put that, let's say that 40 gigawatts in terms of how many homes, the energy use of how many homes, the electricity use of how many homes is that equivalent to in 2022? Well, that's 30 million homes. Okay, so in other words, Ireland has the opportunity to compensate and decarbonise far beyond our energy requirements. And that's what's on offer, I think. That we have true hydrogen, because we are not suggesting that we are going to start cabling Ireland with and using Ireland as some kind of like a foundation stone for the electricity of the rest of Europe. We can't be doing that. Okay, we had enough trouble getting Grid West through. There's not public acceptance for massive grid upgrades, nor does the ESBN want to do that. They themselves have no interest in upgrading the grid to take the offshore generation that's possible in Ireland. But we can, through hydrogen, effectively become a green savior of the rest of Europe, like a green Norway. And in the process, this Irish state stands to make a very substantial amount of money through licensing fees. But you're not licensing gas terminals, you're licensing green energy, sustainability. Okay, very substantial. For example, let's say 1 gigawatt should realize at least 100 million in fees. Okay, so let's say a 50 gigawatts, that's quite a chunk of money. That's billions. Okay, for the Irish state. That's not including the jobs that are available. Okay, that's not including the domestic spend. All right, and it's not including any profits then that will accrue to whatever Irish-based companies are the companies that partner in Ireland. So we see, Energy Corps Ireland see that this opportunity should reside to the greatest extent possible in the hands of the Irish state and the communities that host these installations. That can't be 100% because that's not feasible. These are very, very expensive projects, but that a level of ownership is real and is possible. A level of ownership that will help steer employment opportunities towards the west coast of Ireland as opposed to being imported. Opportunities that will be in sectors where our young people want to work, as opposed to waiting tables and making beds. But it also, it is, which is of course, this is the goal that Valentia Ireland Energy Cooperative has, as do we, maximizing the employment opportunities. No, we're not talking about big windfalls. Most, in fact, if not all of the co-ops that we have founded or have been participating in founding, I should say, that they are non-profits, non-dividend paying. So the money will be recycled socially. I'm waiting for to get away from somebody. Have I overstayed my welcome here?
No, you're perfect. Maybe another minute or so.
Another minute so.
You can keep it on that.
So
I'm going to ask you a question straight away anyway.
Thanks a million. So there is a huge opportunity that Ireland has by not, as you are, as not here, not anywhere is interested in, by not getting involved in fossil fuels, but by say getting involved in offshore renewable generation, energy generation, converts to hydrogen, which can decarbonize countries that are less favored in their exposure to the elements that we are, such as Germany, or such as the east of the UK, such as France. Help decarbonize their industrial sectors. And at the same time, there will be benefits here in terms of we will have our marine sector would be decarbonized. Our aviation sector could be decarbonized. in ways that can't really be achieved through electrification. But I totally agree with everybody. Yes, look, there are plenty of great technologies in the heat pumps sector, so that we don't need domestic heat to be powered by hydrogen. But we certainly will benefit from the harder to reach sectors that only effectively we will be able to achieve ourselves and the Scottish and Finns and the Norwegians. We're in this wonderful position where we can flip the European economy on its side, as it were, and make the western coast of the European Union the centre of economic activity, which would be terrific from a social and cultural point of view. So I'd be pretty glad to answer any questions, so that's not too hard.
Great, thank you so much for that, and that was a really good positive note to finish on, or to finish your piece on. I want to ask you directly before we go back to the other speakers, because I want to give everyone another chance to contribute. I just want to ask you Kira's question in the Q&A there. She says, I've seen hydrogen villages promoted as a form of energy community where a few hundred houses in a rural area would have ownership or use of an electrolyzer, which can be used for energy storage, but also for heating. Does this model make sense for use by small energy communities in terms of affordability of the electrolyzer and the technical expertise needed, and the efficiency of having rural areas rely on hydrogen for some heating purposes rather than just electricity? So hydrogen villages, is that a realistic, with their own electrolyzer, is that a realistic possibility?
Okay, well, okay, there are issues there in terms of the economics, and a small scale electrolyzer now would be 1 megawatt. They cost about €1 million, but you've got to supply them with power. And we've found this in a lot of, for example, we came across this on Valencia, but we've seen it in any other community we've dealt with. People of Achill will tell you the same, people of Inishmore will tell you the same, people of Rathlin Island, wherever our partners are. Basically, you've got to power them with something, okay? Most of these villages that we're talking about, at least on our coastal communities, they're very, very beautiful, and that their tourism is a big part of the economic system, and there are a lot of people employed in it, and that it's good employment. But there are planning issues involved with and there are difficulties that need to be overcome from that point of view. Okay. I think it makes more sense to operate at scale, both economically and from the point of view of that. I just gave you an example. The people of Valencia, the people of Achill, all of them were not in favour, and of Rathlin were not in favour of large scale electricity generation on the islands. Whereas they were more than happy with offshore, because it's far offshore. This isn't like near offshore. This is 20 kilometers off, so it's way in the distance. I say to anybody, you know, if you're lucky enough to see 5 kilometers off the coast of Achill or Valencia, well, jeepers, you're going to be blinded by the sun and enjoying that rather than worrying about whether you can see the turbines. Whereas I don't think the hydrogen villages are that economic, and I think that you always have the problem, where are you going to get your electricity from? And that means, are you willing as a community to host a turbine? And I just know that there's a lot of places that aren't. Okay, but I don't even know that the economics are going to work all that well in its favor either. You better offer large production, gigawatt scale, far enough away, and then that will then have, you'll be able to transport that hydrogen in the various forms we've discussed, whether that be by pipeline or whether that be in ammonium form, or compressed hydrogen, which is also feasible, and use that. But if you're going to do that, then you're going to use that hydrogen for something very special, rather than, like, I mean, if your grid is no good, yeah, maybe then. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you for giving such a such a good and direct answer to that question. So we have about 10 minutes in which I'm going to give the panelists chances to come back in again. And what I'm going to do, so I'm going to spotlight you all, so everyone should be able to see all of you. And I also want to, what I want to do is I'll give each of you maybe, you know, kind of 3 to 4 minutes to I'm going to direct a couple of pieces of questions to you, but also if there's anything else that you want to say in response to, you know, what you've heard or any particular questions, I'll give you a chance to do that as well. So I wanted to go back to James first, and a couple of things that keep coming up in the chat that I was and the Q&A that I was hoping you'd be able to help us with is about Ireland's strategy on hydrogen, if you could potentially comment on that. And there's also a question about CCS as well, integrating, would you recommend integrating that in the decarbonisation process, and yeah, is there a risk of becoming reliant on it? So if you could speak maybe about the government strategy and CCS, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Aileen, and thanks for all the people with their questions. I've been trying to type away, so just trying to help people answer some of those questions. Just in relation to the hydrogen strategy, so there is a consultation that's coming out from the Department of Climate, or Department of Communications, Climate Change, coming out this month or next month. It's coming out very soon anyway. That'll basically be kind of like, what does Ireland and the society think of what should be in a hydrogen strategy. I think this is great. It's a short answer. It's needed to literally make sure that some of the chats here, this greenwashing is washed out, that we ensure that hydrogen is green, that we ensure that the right strategies are taken on, that the funding, the mechanisms are going into the right things, that really hard to decarbonize areas. You know, we don't want to fund your family car to hydrogen, I'm sorry, but we should maybe fund, you know, those dirty, big, heavy 40-ton trucks that are on the road. So it's things like that, I think, that the hydrogen strategy is really necessary to do. And it really also sets in investment. Lou mentioned Scotland. Scotland opened up an auction because they have a strategy, and they got billions of euros of investment into Scotland to potentially develop not hydrogen, but actually offshore wind. And that ultimately is going to ensure that some of that is going to come in as hydrogen. So I think Ireland, just to align with Mide's point there on the same question or a related question, is kind of, you know, we need to encourage renewables and sustainability and this change that we're going through. That all needs to be encouraged. Hydrogen strategy is part of that, but also, to someone else's question, protecting our marine and supporting public transport, and all that needs to all happen parallel. And it's really complex, but it all needs to happen. In relation to carbon capture and storage, we need to plant our requirement from the EU of trees that we have been completely lacking for the last decade. So from a biodiversity point of view, we need thousands and thousands of hectares planted with trees to naturally carbon sink. From a carbon capture storage technology, Ireland doesn't have the place to put carbon. There's one site maybe might work for a couple of years, but other than that, we're going to have ships bringing carbon to like Norway to put carbon in their oil fields. It's complete madness, I think, if Ireland decides to go a technology route in carbon capture and storage. Other countries, perfect, go for it, because we need you anyway in the future. But the short answer, unless my internet drops out again, is we need to support renewables. We need to support the things that we can do well here in Ireland.
Brilliant, thanks, James. I'm going to move back to Giuseppe now, and I have a couple of questions for you, as well as opening to you to say whatever you'd like in response to questions, or maybe the other panelists. There was a question very early on about, it was from Connor, and it was, is it not the case that it is fossil fuel companies that are pushing for hydrogen at the moment? For instance, SSE, I guess that's, or SSE are a company who extract natural gas and are planning to invest in the proposed hydrogen hub in Galway, which is another, Giuseppe is the best city in Ireland, just to say, and I happen to be from there. But anyway, it's another another city in the west coast of Ireland. How do we avoid ending up with a fossil fuel lock-in as in a transition to hydrogen? And also, there's a question we didn't really look at, I don't think, is hydrogen the best energy carrier compared to ammonia or other alternatives? So it would be great if you could touch on is hydrogen, bringing us towards risking fossil fuel lock-in, or given that it's fossil fuel, some fossil fuel companies involved, and also the question about hydrogen versus ammonia, I guess, as energy carriers.
Yes, I mean, of course, I mean, I am not from Ireland. Unfortunately, I've only been there once, so I can't speak too much for Ireland. What I've seen, I mean, for example, this week I've seen a Financial Times graph that was indicating the share of what kind of energy sources is used in heating in different countries. And I see Ireland, there's a big chunk of it that is served by oil. And this makes me think that you guys basically don't have a very dense distribution gas network. And I think this is good because it might help you transition, it might help you avoid a lock-in with gas in heating, which is so endemic of certain member states in Europe. And you might find it easier to shift to heat pumps. So how do you avoid lock-in? And I would say people should push to replace this oil with something else that is not gas or hydrogen, basically. When it comes to the second question, I am not sure. Yeah, I mean, for me, my understanding is that ammonia and hydrogen, they serve two different purposes, and depending also on a variety of sets of circumstances, you'll find it more appropriate to use one or the other. So, and yeah, we could have a whole webinar on that, I guess. And I guess only one point to close, because I was really interested on what Lou was, I mean, you promoted Ireland a lot today. And I think it's really important if Ireland does have, the climate conditions to be a front runner and produce a lot of hydrogen. I think it's important and export it essentially to Europe. I think that's really important, because one thing that we might want to avoid to do is to import hydrogen from abroad. Let it be from a country where it could be less equitable to import it from, or maybe a country where it's just simply too far away, like Australia, and then you start to have some problems with the energy losses in the transport. So please do go for that. And sorry, on that note, what I wanted to say on the speeding up renewables that James was mentioning, it's besides the social acceptance, which is really important, I think we do have a big problem in Europe, which is permitting. It's simply inconceivable that wind farms and big utility scale projects takes years to be just approved. If we are to deploy these renewables as fast as we say we want to. So permitting is really something that we should look at, both at a member state level, and especially at a member state level, but also at a European level.
Brilliant, thank you, Giuseppe, and you're all doing really well on time. I do want to ask Louis a final question, and I'm going to be selfish, it's one of my questions, but hopefully it'll be interesting for more people. And also, if the other members of the panel want to say something about this in the chat or anything, please work away. But I wanted to ask, when the government does come out with this sort of proposed hydrogen strategy for Ireland, this public consultation, Louis, for you, with your experience working with Energy Cooperatives Ireland and on hydrogen, what will you be telling the government in that consultation? What do you want to see from a policy perspective? And I suppose what would you advise, other people listening to sort of put in a consultation like that? And yeah, like I said, the other panelists, please feel free to write in the chat about this as well.
Cool. So thanks. What would I like to see? Oh, that's like a kind of a Christmas question. I think speed it up. I think that's really it. I think we've done enough. We have enough knowledge of the sector. Now, what I mean by that is that there is a long lead-in time for all of these projects. Okay, there's an awful lot of care has to be taken with doing anything to our seabed and doing anything in our seas, and we have to be very careful about what we do there. And so we have to do a really, really exhaustive environmental impact assessments. Okay, we also have to go through a planning process that has to really kick around these projects with regards to public acceptance, with regards to whether these projects are going to be for the public good. And that takes a lot of takes a lot of time, takes a lot of consultation. So I would think that yes, there's a good 3 years of environmental assessment work. Some of the projects won't get over the line. We have to accept that there's going to be failures. Sorry, there's two not going to interfere with the migration of a particular marine mammal. You can't do it. Some of it's going to fail on the point of view that it's going to interfere with fisheries. Some of it's going to fail because it's public acceptance isn't there. The planning is also going to have to be done. But we need to start the planning and the environmental impacts assessments now. So we need the granting of the licenses now. That license isn't the end of the matter. You can still, as I said, there's lots of hoops and things you have to do before you fail or succeed and before a project goes ahead. I'd say that let's say if Valencia got its exploration license, let's say by October, it'll be 2028, 2029 before we were even thinking of building anything. Okay, and that's a long time. Now, if we start messing about with this and taking too long over this, we'll end up, this will be 3035. And we won't have an ecology to save. We will have goosed ourselves. Okay, and that's where we are. We know it can happen. We just need to start the steps towards build out now, but we need to start them now. So we really need the government to say, okay, fine, we have to start applying the licensing now. Now everybody will take a risk. It's totally reasonable that that's going to happen. People are taking risks. And that I really want a really good and exhaustive analysis on the environmental impact of every project and on the planning, whether it's right or wrong in the planning sector for every project. So to give that time across, you should give it about 8 years, you know, 6 maybe, I suppose, between 6 and 8 years. So we need to be starting 2022. Give us the licenses, get out of the way, because it's only going to benefit in the long run. It's going to benefit us from the sustainability point of view. It's going to benefit us from the economic and the social point of view. And the state itself will be a great beneficiary as well. But I just think that we could think this thing to death. You know, there will be a lot of analysis to follow. But whether you give the licenses or not, that doesn't take that much analysis. Just do it.
I think that's a really good note to finish on, which is just highlighting the urgency of the energy transition. You know, we need this. This needs to be clean. This needs to be safe. There needs to be proper public consultation, and it needs to happen now. So thank you so much to all our panelists. I know I'm looking forward to watching the recording back myself, because it was so interesting to hear the 3 different perspectives. And yeah, we really appreciate you giving us our time. And it was fantastic to hear from you. And thank you as well to all our attendees and people who proposed questions. It was, yeah, the questions were really good, and it was great to get that broad discussion. It just remains for me to say, after the thank yous, and thank you to my colleagues at Not Here Not Anywhere as well. There were so many people, especially Roisin is doing great work in managing the Q&A and the chat there, and there are all the others behind the scenes are doing amazing work. And yeah, it couldn't have happened without it. I better not go on, but yeah, you know who you are. Everyone Not Here Not Anywhere, you're great. And yeah, so we will be sending a follow-up email with the recording to everyone who registered. Feel free to watch it back and get all the insights. And we'll also probably send you a short feedback survey as well. It'd be great if attendees could fill that in as well. So thanks to everyone for coming, and we're going to head off now and see you at our next webinar.
Thanks. Bye-bye.